We are hoping to go to Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy any moment. I think, just checking we've got her, but yeah, I think we might have. As we've been hearing, a 5-day walkout by resident doctors has started this morning. It's a move which has been branded morally reprehensible by Health Secretary Wes Streeting.
But the British Medical Association argues doctors have been pushed to breaking point and the action is justifiable. The Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy joins us live from Media City in Salford. Good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. What is the way then to resolve this? These strikes look set to continue and potentially escalate with one a month in the future. What's going to be the way through?
I think the way through is for the BMA leadership to recognise that this is completely unacceptable and come back to the table. The Health Secretary has been really clear in recent weeks. He's put a clear offer on the table to the BMA leadership, which includes some of the really key demands, rightly from junior doctors, about easing workplace pressures, about expanding training places, and about dealing with some of the expenses that they face, things like exam fees and others, to make sure that they're not out of pocket. It's important to recognise that junior doctors have had the biggest pay rise in the public sector over the last 2 years. Last year, they were granted a pay rise by the Health Secretary of 28.9%. And we recognise that there are real pressures on junior doctors, as there are on all public sector workers, but it is completely unacceptable to end up in a situation where patients up and down the country are suffering because the BMA leadership won't negotiate on those terms, and our door remains open.
Yeah.
We want them to call off this strike action and come back to the table.
The issue is, though, they're not going to do that, are they? They're quite adamant that their pay is way down. They say the government have failed to finish the journey to restoring it, and they say that it's doctors that are holding together a broken system. They don't think that they're being treated fairly. So how do you resolve that difference in that case? Because, as you say, in the meantime, it's patients that are suffering. We know from the last strike, some 54,000 appointments were cancelled or had to be rescheduled. And the cost of this, estimates show since 2023 to 2024, cost £1.7 billion. It's not just the impact on people, it's the cost to the nation as well at the moment. So what is the way to resolve it?
Well, we've put in place emergency plans, and we expect that 95% of planned procedures are going to go ahead despite these 5 days of strike action that the BMA has decided to hold. But I think most people, including junior doctors, would understand that, you know, right across the board, when you look at public sector workers, we've given them the biggest pay rise in the first 10 months of a Labour government than in 10 years under a Conservative government. But we've done, more importantly, we've invested record investment into the National Health Service. We've taken some criticism for raising the money to do that, but we've done it. And as a result, waiting lists are coming down. We've made more than 5 million more appointments available. This month, we were able to announce that 16,000
to interrupt, but
people
none
have
of
been
that,
taken off waiting lists.
None of that
but that
helps
does
stop
help.
the strike, does it?
That does help.
Doesn't help stop the strike, though, does it?
It does help because it helps change the working conditions that people in the National Health Service have had to put up with for far too long. And I think most people, including junior doctors, would understand that. We can't keep offering the biggest pay rises across the public sector to junior doctors alone, but there are things that we can do to help. So we're asking the BMA to call off these strikes, come back to the table and work with us to fix an NHS that has been neglected for far too long.
Would you consider banning strikes?
We're not planning to ban strikes. We've just introduced the biggest overhaul of employment rights in a generation. We want to make sure that people have security at work. We want to solve the problem here. The problem is an NHS that had been neglected for a decade and a half. That had affected pay, it had affected working conditions, and it had sent waiting lists through the roof. We're fixing the problem on all fronts, and most of the NHS workforce is working with us to do that. And our message to the BMA leadership is drop these strikes, come to the table and help us to fix these problems.
OK. Let's move on to the crisis at the BBC following the error they made, a very significant error in the misclip, if we'd like to call it that, of President Trump. They've now offered a formal apology. Samir Shah, the chair of the board, has sent an apology over, but no compensation. Do you think they're right to do that? Do you agree with the apology, and do you agree with the issue that we actually should not be giving any money to President Trump?
Well,
or the BBC, at least.
Well, on the legal question, they've obviously consulted the lawyers and come to the view that there is no defamation case, and they've set that out in a response to President Trump and his administration. I think they're right to apologise. I think BBC leadership is right to accept that this was a really serious mistake. They've already apologised to Parliament and to the public, and I think they're right to reiterate that apology to President Trump. But most importantly, I think what the BBC leadership has been doing over the last week, and I've been speaking to them daily, is putting in place the right processes to make sure that editorial failings don't happen in future, and looking forward to the future with the appointment of a new Director General and senior leadership team, making sure they've got the right mix of experience at the top of the organisation to protect a news organisation that is the most trusted in the UK and one of the most trusted around the world.
You've been speaking to the board and you speak to officials there, but if you speak to former BBC journalists and you speak to some people working there, some people are not happy with some members of that board. There is some talk. There are members of that board that are actually involved in some kind of coup, want to change the future of the BBC, both politically. And a lot of journalists feel very compromised. Very senior former journalists who've spent 20 years so have made some really damning comments about the board. Are you concerned? Is that something you are looking into and making an investigation to go whether that board of the BBC is fit and proper?
Yes, so obviously the government doesn't appoint the board. We appoint the chairman of the board, and then those questions are rightly for him, because the BBC is independent.
I thought the government appoints some members of the board, don't you? You appoint some members of there, don't you? I think, is it 4?
Yes, so I was about to say there are 4 members of the board who represent the 4 nations, England, Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. They are political appointments. They were appointed by the last government. And in the case of one member of the board who I was asked about repeatedly in the House of Commons this week, that appointment was extended a few weeks before the general election and runs to 2028. There's a very high threshold for the government removing members of those boards. There's a strict legal threshold that has to be met. But I've heard loud and clear the concern, not just from journalists, but from members of Parliament and members of the public, about political appointments on the board of the BBC, and that is certainly something that we will be looking at as we review the BBC's charter, which will set the terms for the next 10 years, about whether it is appropriate for the government, any government, to make political appointments to the board of our national broadcaster. OK,
listen, I know that you want to talk about the government putting up £500,000 to help get more young people into creative industries, which is obviously, a very positive thing. It doesn't seem like a good, a big amount of money, though, does it, when you consider the problem that we've got at the moment with unemployment and people needing those opportunities? There is a situation at the moment, isn't there? We look at the growth figures yesterday, lower than expected, and we look at the unemployment figures, 5%, the highest level in 4 years. There's this big issue with creating the job opportunities, making sure those jobs are there for our young people to go into.
Of course, there's a huge challenge around this. We inherited a situation where 1 in 8 young people was not in education, employment or training, and we think that is a disgrace. We've effectively, for too long, written off a generation of young people, and we've got to turn it around. And you're right to say that the announcement that we've made today with the Idris Elba Foundation and the King's Trust won't turn that around by itself, although I do believe passionately that our creative industries, music, film, TV and others, have to be for everybody. And when working class young people from outside of London tell us that they couldn't get a hope of getting into them, we should take that seriously. But there is far more that we're doing as a government in order to turn this situation around. OK, Lisa Nandy, Culture Secretary, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.